Namaste, Monica. Welcome. Dr. Monica Sharma.
Namaste, Rajni ji.
What is your earliest encounter with the idea or the practice of nonviolence?
You know, my mother recalls something, and I think my parents have been the basis of my growing up with this approach of being different. So for them, Ahimsa was not a concept, intellectual concept. It was a way of being. I believe, and I can still remember the moment, I was 3 years old, and I saw in Shillong, which is a hilly space, I saw a horse being whipped because the horse could not go up. And I believe I ran behind the cart to push it up, but the cart was coming onto me. I can remember that moment. And my mother was in this frenzy, oh my God, she's going to die. But you know, when I look back, that immediate moment of caring was because my mother loved animals. And we always cared, not just for animals. We cared for all sentient beings and humans. You know, she loved plants. And I remember that, yeah, I think that was a moment. I think there's a second moment that was when I was 5 years old. And this time I'll talk about my father. From my father, I learned Ahimsa in practice, not Ahimsa as a concept. And for him, the oneness of human beings was just part of his life. And he was a senior administrator in the Indian government. And much later, I heard about the way he handled the riots when they were with Ahimsa. And for me, I remember we had a sad kind of event in the home. My brother, who was born, passed away very young. My mother was weeping. And my father bought one of the 2 wind-up gramophones that the city had. Rajni, do you remember the wind-up gramophones?
Very much.
He also bought some records to play. And he felt that music would soothe my mother. And he bought it for her because she was very sad, naturally. And I remember a song from Paul Robeson being played. And he explained that to me. And he said, you know, Paul Robeson is singing about racism. In our country, we have casteism. And he said, it's the same thing worldwide. We don't practice Ahimsa. And there was no bitterness. It was just a knowing. So those are my 2 earliest recollections. One from my mother, one from my father, that has shaped. Of course, my mother says, I have empathy, and I believe you do too. I believe all human beings can activate that space. Yeah.
In what ways, Monica, did this sense of empathy first manifest in your choice to be a physician? And what was the journey from being a physician to joining the United Nations, where you did a very different kind of healing work? Can you say something about that transition, please?
Okay, so can I say that there are some, I don't know where these things happen from. So I was 8 years old, I think. And in school, we had Albert Schweitzer's life. We had great people's lives. Albert Schweitzer was one of them. And I came to my father that day and I said to him, I said, Baba, this is who I want to be. He said, you know, whoever you want to be, just know one thing, I'm going to support it. My father has always allowed me to be beyond the stereotype of what a woman should be or a girl should be in the house. And I recall my mother saying, you know, you encourage her like this to do what she wants, and no one's ever going to marry her, you know, as if that was the ultimate purpose of life. You know how that is, Rajni. And he said, it doesn't matter whether she marries or not. What matters is whether she's happy in life. So that's how I became a physician. I think I love what I do. So when when anybody loves what they do and they put in their best, doesn't matter who gets the credit, who gets what the results are. Something happens in that alchemy of you know, the alchemy between knowledge, expertise, a wanting to make a difference, and standing in where I stand. I think is actually the secret of Ahimsa.
Can you say a bit more about how this insight, I imagine, played a very key role in how you developed the transformational leadership program and process?
In the book that I wrote, Radical Transformational Leadership, there is at the latter part of the book, actually page 222, because everybody asks me about this, there is a section on the intersectionality of disempowering isms. So for me, Ahimsa is a way of being. So in the writing that I have read of your book and in the conversations we've had, there is a very strong space you stand in, as I do, and I call that compassion. So compassion is more than empathy. Compassion is what Daniel Goleman says, when you see suffering, you act. You and I act differently. You write, you speak, you gather people. But we act. We don't, and that is a very strong space. Compassion. I'm tearing up, not because I'm crying, it's just that I've had an eye surgery, so I tear. So pardon me if that's happening. So I stand in compassion. That horse incident or whatever it is, that's a part of my heart, which everybody has according to research. According to research, every human being has a space of caring beyond self. There are studies after studies on this. Like when the Framingham studies were done in the 70s about why is it some children are managed to make it in spite of war and in their village and others don't. It's this ability to expand beyond self. So compassion is a wounded heart of love for everybody, not just my family, my people, my biradri, my whatever, okay? And the second thing is that I think that the research from Daniel Goleman's work shows that self-worth is a very important aspect of Ahimsa. Self-worth is self-awareness. I don't need to kill. I don't need to dominate anybody. In fact, self-worth and self-awareness, according to him, is the single biggest predictor of effective leadership. And he studied, you know, some 200 Harvard graduates, and he found that what I had studied in medical school, that IQ is very important, is not the predictor of success. What is the predictor of success is EQ. The emotional intelligence we have as humans, provided we choose to cultivate it. We have to cultivate it. Indeed, all the strategies in medicine and clinical science on healing has to do with the sense of self of the patient. It's not treatment. So I'm very clear there's a huge difference between treating a patient and healing a patient. That healing requires me to build the sense of self in my patient and me, and it's an interaction. So to me, Ahimsa is founded on 3 legs of humans. Number 1, compassion, as I see you. Number 2, the ability to uphold dignity in everybody. not call murder of a couple honor killing. It's caste murder. It's not honor killing. So we have this way of sanitizing our words so that we do not make a difference. I'm very clear about language and how we perpetuate Ahimsa, how we are perpetuating Ahimsa through our language, not Ahimsa. So for me, that part that I learned from Daniel's work, Goleman's work, has influenced, and it was in me from age 3. It's in you, you know, it's in every human being. We found this worldwide in my work. And then there's a third pillar. And that's the pillar that you and I and most of us work on. And that pillar is really our sense of fairness and equity. And I always knew it existed. And I will tell you very early on what I did. But when I read the Oxfam report of 2015, it's called Even It Up, they did a survey in the US and found that 92% of people in the US believe in fairness. Then why this racism? Why this casteism? Why this sexism? Why this ableism? Why this anthropocentrism? So the question is simple. We are not tapping into our greatness. So my work began really on the learning from my parents, from wonderful, not all of them, but wonderful teachers in school and college. While I was at the National Institute of Health and Family Welfare, I was part of a multicentric study that was, you know, designed by ICMR to look at nutrition and food. And of course, malnutrition is a huge issue in India. And what I did was I decided that we always extract information in research. We never give back to community. That's just how research is done worldwide. And then where does the research land? Some of the research may be used. Most of the research is not. And the communities from which we extract data, we don't go back and give anything. The providers we use or the people we use to get the data get nothing. So then I decided I'm going to do this differently. Of course, I'll do all that ICMR requires me to generate. And I decided on 2 things. I said, you know what? We worked with the Anganwadi workers and the multipurpose workers, the auxiliary nurse midwives, the men and the women. And I said, each of you develop a small initiative that you feel like doing in your village, in your subcenter. And we will record that. This was in 1980. And every one of them had prepared something in Hindi and got somebody to translate it in English. This was in Madhya Pradesh we met. And we created a book. And then the district health officer said, but why is I'm not written? I said, you can write the foreword, but this is their work. It'll be their authorship. They cried, Rajni, when they presented. Nobody's ever asked them. They had the village people. They did educational projects. They did different kinds of projects for home gardens. They did projects on all kinds of things. They got the khichdi going. They got different kinds of food going, and they wrote about it. They wrote about the result they created, not just their activity. They did what an epidemiologist would do worldwide. They recalled that moment. They said, you know, there was a moment in our lives, we were academics. We wrote, we published. That to me is equity. That to me is fairness. That's fairness in research. So it is not writing about them only, but it's having them live with a sense of dignity that I felt was present. So, you know, I don't know how I thought of it. I didn't have the language called equity. I always had that sense that my father spoke of, because we always had children being educated at home, who my father paid for to go to school, who could not afford in our home. So that was part of my growing up. I learned it from him. So ahimsa is not having to control through domination. And so for me, learning, I like what you say, Rajni, because I have opened myself to lifelong learning. I've done about 25 courses for me to grow, including Vipassana, where I'm a regular practitioner. So for me, I have invested in my personal growth, but only to serve differently, because, you know, in our language, I am a karma yogi in the sense that I'm not there yet. I wish I was, but it's my path.
Yeah.
You know, we all have different paths, but for me, that's my path. As a physician, I don't practice now. So to me, you know, how do I handle insult? There's a very beautiful story in Vipassana when people wanted to insult Buddha. He said, I don't wish to accept the gift of words from you. Right. So it's hard to insult me now. For a moment, I will feel derailed, but I know that I don't have a hidden agenda, you see. Yeah. It's my own, I believe I grow more doing this work than, you know, who's the one who benefits at the end of every day? Rajni, it's me. You know? And so for me, I go to bed in peace. Yeah. I think I don't take these things personally. I work always for results, but the results actually are not why I work, it's the effort. I think that I have some very practical things. Like I will only connect with people who want to shift justice and inequality. Whenever we are in crisis, we find somebody to dump it on. If we grow up, we don't do that. Why don't we understand freedom? So right now, worldwide, total confusion on ahimsa. Ahimsa is freedom based on liberty, no bias, the freedom you stand for. Mukti. Mukti from my biases, so that I don't have to kill to feel better. So freedom is mukti. Why are people calling wearing a mask lack of freedom? It's not lack of freedom, it's a preference. So language. When we make killing freedom, owning a gun freedom, we've missed the point. We've missed pursuit of happiness. We've missed liberty. We've missed solidarity. Yeah, so, yeah.
Monica, can you explain how you apply freedom as you understand it, and in the sense that you have connected it to ahimsa? How does that emerge as an experience during your transformational leadership process?
There are about 10 ways to do it. And depending on where I am, I will do it differently. So most of the places I work, or I choose to work, are people who care about justice, about equity, about dignity, about compassion, because justice without compassion is very harsh. And so for me, I choose my partners. And therefore, the setup is usually quite, you know, we are like-spirited, shall we say, as when I came over to work with you in Citizens for Peace, with Gulan Parvin and others. So for me then, if it is a group that wishes to generate a result, as Citizens for Peace did, and the result was very clear, we live with a sense of oneness without othering, then I will always connect it to action, because knowledge is gained on the doorstep of action, said Uma, you know, one of the women I work with. So I will connect individuals to whatever they would wish to do. And then I will have them recognize that they can shift that and who do they need to be, not what do they think. Because people always think that ideological stances create change. Ideological stances may be a support structure. It's never created change. I begin from the place of cultural transformation, not this big system out there. And I ask them, what you want to make happen has happened. What really do you deeply care about? What do you stand for? There are 10 ways of doing it. And people will come, and I call it universal values. What you're willing to stand for everybody, not just your children, not just your family, not just your biradri or anyone. That ability to connect with who I am is an extremely peaceful space. And it's that peace that they taste for a moment. It's a blissful space. It's like the space when one person who was part of the, again, Hemlata worked with you all, and she came and organized this for the sewerage workers in Himachal Pradesh, and I did this work with them. And I remember, I wrote about it in the book, Rajni, when one man stood up and said, till today I was untouchable. Today I'm a human being. That moment is unforgettable for everybody in the room. That moment when you ask the right question, what's missing, not what's wrong, because wrong has right with it. So I will ask what they care for, and I'll give you another example. So you know that female genital mutilation is not a religious practice. It's a pharaonic practice that's been around the Nile, and when I was working in the Arab states, we use these tools with my colleague who's an unstoppable human rights activist, Khadija. And we had 150 religious leaders in Djibouti, mostly men, a few women. And they, usually a religious leader, when they deepen themselves, they will say, I stand for the mercy of Allah, an imam will say, and genuinely believe that, and genuinely open that space. And a priest will say, I am the compassion of Christ. Then I ask a question. When this 27-year-old woman stands up, and we've established Muhammad never promoted female genital, Prophet Muhammad, never. Jesus never. So it's not religion, it's not written in the Bible, it's not written in the Quran. So why is it that we say this? All this is established. It's not the same as male circumcision. And I only stood up and I asked a question. You are the mercy of Allah, and you are the compassion of Christ. How is it that we unknowingly have promoted the suffering this 27-year-old Somali girl went through? When she was 5 years old, she bled, she almost died. And what it meant to have her reproductive parts, external parts, absolutely mutilated. And that day, the Imam stood up and said, I will have a fatwa against this. And he went back to Cairo. He was the head of that. And we strategize, you see. We strategize for Ahimsa. It doesn't emerge. And one of our strategies is to support people who take risks. And I've written about it with beautiful examples from India, especially of a police officer who took the risk not to shoot somebody, who could not bear to shoot somebody on the basis of religion. It was the same thing. So he took the risk, and we knew something would happen. So in advance, Khadija had met the Grand Mufti and said, it's not in the religious books. And today we've started in those places where there is teaching of the next generation, imams, and father from Jordan stood up and said, they also promote it because it's a Nile practice, you see. And so they have also changed the way they speak. To me, that is progress. Then, of course, I always get the academics to write back and say, but the data shows it hasn't changed. But change doesn't begin with everything changing. Change begins when you can activate, amplify what works, which is what you do, Rajni. That we talk about the people who are taking risk. which is like the series that Amir Khan puts out, you know. We talk about the people who take the risk to change. Till we talk about them and support them, we will have Ahimsa. There is something beautiful in human consciousness when we can transcend ideological beliefs. So we do one thing more, which is vital for this, for Ahimsa not to be present. We work on the identities that we have been socialized and educated with. So the identities that we have, usually parents educate us, usually our broader family educates us, religion educates us, our schools educate us. If in our school we are told that for the midday meal, Dalit children have to sit separately, they cannot drink water, or a Dalit teacher cannot sit on a chair, then we are not practicing Ahimsa, right? So what is it in us that we must hide behind these? So there's another book I'm reading, and the book is written by an African-American scholar. His name is Kendi, and he says, How to be an anti-racist. He says, stop saying I'm not racist. Stop saying I believe in Ahimsa. Saying I am anti-Himsa. So because we want to cloud it, and there's a lovely joke, you know, and so it's by a comedian in the US. And he said, you know, that we sanitize words so that we don't offend. So, for example, when a country was bombed by another country in the Middle East, the newspapers wrote about civilians who were killed. And then they were informed that they would be told something or excluded if they didn't call it collateral damage. So bombing led to collateral damage. Guess what everyone thought? It's something to do with bank loans or collaterals or something. Nobody understood it. We sanitized it. So they talked about war. And they said in World War I, when veterans returned to the US, they called it shell shock. Easy to understand, easy to deal with. By the time it was World War II, they called it battle fatigue. So then the fault is theirs, they are tired. By the time it was the Korean War, they started calling it something like some other sanitized word, which was something like inability to cope, or, you know, some defect in the veteran. That's why, you know, you keep bombing, you're not supposed to suffer. And by the time it was the Vietnam War, we call it PTSD, which nobody understands what it is, post-traumatic stress syndrome or disorder. And for a common person who wants to contribute to and make Ahimsa a reality, you actually don't get it. So basically, we use the inner capacity of humans that exist worldwide. We distinguish that from our social profile, which we would like to embrace, but not embrace as a divisive force. Embrace it as a unifying force. And the way that to distinguish, to have the courage to call out in my own culture, things that are very not okay. So the courage to challenge my own culture.
So what would be your advice to young people about how in their own life, in big, small, gigantic ways, whatever scale it might be, how they may work towards Ahimsa?
Oh, I love the question. Could it be for all ages with a focus on the young?
Yes, of course, please.
Yes.
Make it with,
because ego exists everywhere, right?
Yes,
in all
no,
ages,
make it for all ages. Yes.
Yeah, the young also have their ego. So the conscious full spectrum model, which is very simple actually, and everyone can learn it, including people who are not formally educated in reading and writing, because we've worked it, is what we call a fractal. A fractal is a pattern in physics that repeats itself. So every human being, whether I'm a housewife or a house husband, or I'm a laborer working, or I'm a policymaker, or I'm the head of state, because I've actually worked with heads of state. And when I was at the UN, no longer. So basically, we have a choice. It's actually the young person's choice. Am I going to learn to have the fractal of enduring equitable change manifest? That's the first question. Am I willing to learn the fractal of change that can make a difference? Second, am I willing to excel? Like a tennis champion doesn't only read a book on making tennis, how to play tennis, actually gets onto the court. Am I willing to be in action? And am I willing to be in action differently? Am I willing to learn how to design differently? Because today, Ahimsa exists because of our cultural norms. And so for me, 4 simple things. Number 1, know that if you worked with the conscious full spectrum response model, not understanding model, that you're part of scale. Just know that, if you know how to do it. It's in the book, and we have webinars, that they have a series of 12 webinars. Sudarshan runs them, and basically they can join the webinars and just hear how everybody's applying it for different topics. But the basic thing is, will I learn how to use a very simple, conscious, full spectrum response model? Am I willing to go beyond intellectualization and be in action? And do it in simple ways, educating children. We've had people work during COVID times, how I serve others, how I interrupt social media of hatred. This they can do. One of the actions they can do is they can promote Ahimsa in a genuine way, not through rhetoric, on social media. They're all on social media. So am I willing to be in action? What I write, what I say. Number 3, am I willing to actually work for some result? Because at the end of it, Rajni, it is not a philosophy of change. It's not a theory of change. It's the theory and practice of change. And it's subject agnostic. That means you can apply it to anything. So am I willing to commit to a result, knowing that the word failure does not exist in this work? Sometimes we don't succeed. It's like a river. I got to be like a river. When a river meets a boulder, it doesn't say, oh no, boulder, I will stop flowing. It finds a pathway. So like that, I need, the destination is the ocean for the river. And so for me, I need to let go of this ego and redefine what success means.
Thank you so much, Monica.